Cleveland. I'm with Boundary Stone. We're here to provide you with resources so that you can appropriately engage your culture and really just understand it and be able to defend your Western civilization. Today what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit are the means of production. Economists, we all classify the means of production into three main areas. And we just have labeled these: land, labor, and capital. So let's just kind of unpack each of these a little bit. Land, well, what do we mean? Well, we mean all those natural resources just out there in the world. Things like iron ore, other minerals that are in the ground that we can go and mine out of the ground and utilize. Crude oil that we can pump out of the ground. Just the forest, the trees, all these sorts of things. They're just out there. And so those are natural resources that we utilize to produce various things that we then find useful to achieve our ends, our purposes in life. The second is labor. Well, straightforward enough. Labor is what we do. It's the human resource. Now, we're all quite different than one another, and so we have different inclinations, different attributes, different talents, and all of us are engaged in efforts to develop those to be able to offer our services, our labor services in the market most effectively, most efficiently to achieve our own ends. And then finally, there's capital. Capital is not money. I think we have a lot of confusion. People oftentimes in finance, and I teach finance, will talk about capital as if it's just money. Well, that's finance, and capital must be financed, and so a lot of times we've got to go into financial markets to acquire the funds to purchase the capital. But let's just talk about what we really mean by capital. What we mean is all those economic goods that have been produced that are then used to produce other goods. That's what capital is. So, for example, and in fact, we'll break it down a little further. Let's break this down into two different kinds of capital. First, there's fixed capital, and then second, circulating capital. Well, let me give you a brief example of the difference between these two. So if we think about, say, an automobile manufacturing plant. Okay, so there are a couple of automakers close to where I live in Birmingham, Alabama. And so we go there and toured through the plant. Well, the plant itself, the buildings, those are all part of their fixed capital stock. And if we go into the plant, we'll find conveyor belts, presses, robots, all sorts of equipment that's fixed in the plant that's utilized to make automobiles. Well, what about circulating capital? Okay, well, the circulating capital, though, comes this way. Every day, probably there will be deliveries of things like windshields, as well as automobile tires, as well as other sorts of things that are going to be utilized to make an automobile. And so, things like sheet metal will show up, and it'll be rolled out and pressed into various parts. And those parts will go into inventory, and then those parts will be utilized as they're assembled to make the final product, an automobile. Maybe it's an SUV, maybe it's a sedan, whatever the automobile that they're making at the particular plant. And then once it rolls off the line and it's sitting out in inventory in a stock waiting to be delivered to a dealership, it's still part of their circulating capital, so it's moving through a process towards the final consumer. Well, both of these types of capital are quite important to us and the way in which we produce things in order to meet our needs. Now, in future times together, we're going to unpack these in a little greater detail because it's really important to have more information about this, or we're likely to be led down some very bad paths. Anyway, Dr. Paul Cleveland, hope this is helpful to you. Check out our website, boundarystone.org, and see the resources that we have to help you engage with your culture. I'll see you next time. Bye.